Welcome, everyone, and welcome to this webinar from Small Business Australia and with PEXA. We're really excited today to bring you two fabulous speakers from PEXA. We have Cheryl Dixon, the Executive Account Manager, Major Firms from PEXA, and also Graham Fairley, the Chief Information Security Officer from PEXA. And we're really excited to bring you this webinar today because the world is feeling a little bit uncertain at the moment. There's quite a bit of chatter online. There's quite a bit going on around the world, and it can feel a little bit uncertain. So we wanted to bring you this today to, if you like, let you know what's really happening in the world, and also give you some great tips and tools going forward and what you can actually do to make your business the amazing business that it is and can be. And I'm really pleased to introduce Cheryl Dixon, from the Executive Account Manager from Major Firms at PEXA, who's going to be talking to us today about the major challenges for practitioners in 2025. Please welcome Cheryl.
So a little bit about me, because you may not know who I am other than the picture you see there in the title. But look, over the last 9 years, I've had the opportunity and been very fortunate to be working with practitioners and the property industry as we've transitioned to electronic conveyancing and across most states. And in case you didn't know, I'm pretty excited this month. Tasmania's on board. And not too far away is Northern Territory. So that's just a little bit of FYI for you. I guess I love what I do because I do believe in change. And gee, that might seem a little strange, but having led large organisations and sales teams in my previous life before PEXA, I do understand the impact that change can have on people, risk, process, and of course cost associated with that as well. And I guess that may have sounded a little bit in a negative context, but actually I do mean this also in a very positive context, because we all know how frustrating complex, manual, duplicated processes can be. It can be frustrating us as individuals, but disengaging for teams. Not to mention the delays that can happen for customers as a result of it, and unintended delays. So over the next 15 minutes, I'm going to cover the three areas. First one is that change for 2025, a chance to call out some key items, and I respect that it's not going to be every piece of change that possibly will land with us in 2025, but a few key items I'd like to call out. And I guess equally important is the opportunities this presents, and how can these opportunities actually be capitalised on. And I want to specifically relate this to how you do your work. So how you do your work today, and with change, how might that impact the way you do your work or the way you want to do your work in the future? You've probably heard that referred to an as is to be in a project sense before, or something like that. So let's move on to the change, some of the change, and we purposely put that into clouds because sometimes it does feel like you're up in the clouds with all of the things going on. But look, there's a number of things that you can see on the page, but it's not everything. So don't just think about this at an industry level. Bring it back to your environment, your business, your role, and of course the work that you do. Things could be going on in your business that are unique to your business too, that you could relate this to. So let's call out a few. The one up the top there I call out first because it's a pretty big one. In November last year, that's the AML federal government legislation. November last year, federal Parliament passed legislation to expand the Australian anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing regime to property transactions. So this will obviously, with that word property transactions in there, this will impact all practitioners. And that actually becomes effective in March 2026. Another one you've probably already heard of is the removal of cheques. So no more checkbooks, no more checks. It's a very specific item on the agenda with the banks. And I guess the question there is, how might matters be settled in the future if we don't have checks? Because not everything goes through PEXA rights, not everything is digital. So what's the impact of that going to be? One we're all familiar with and we hear every day: economy, interest rates, regulatory decisions, elections are just around the corner, and of course it's going to make for interesting times for us. There wouldn't be too many days too that go by where we don't hear about AI automation and decision making. And I guess the next question is, well, where's the relevance of that for me? And do I need to care about that? Another item, integration. It is seamless integration solutions and APIs. I will call out, I do have a bias for this because I do spend a lot of time with practitioners working on this particular item as a way of providing solutions. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about that soon. But I didn't know what the word integration meant 6 years ago. But I love it now because I understand it. So integration is a very broad word. So how does that really help me streamline processes? And Graham's going to give us a little bit of intel soon around cybersecurity, but I guess we should acknowledge that it's not very hard to find a story in the paper to talk about the impact that cybersecurity has on us as people, but as practitioners, impact, and then of course the end impact that can have on customers. And nobody goes out there to seek these things happening. It's just a pretty unfortunate thing that continues to raise its ugly head, so to speak. Now, I haven't covered all those things, but feel free to be starting to jot some thoughts in your mind around, what change means to you and what other things might be on your mind. And I think we should acknowledge that we all have very trusted forums, networks that establish that go along to providing critical information and industry knowledge to us, and which really helps supports decisions around change. Peak bodies, fantastic, do an amazing job to represent practitioners and industry decisions. And of course, those decisions, how they're made and when they're made, and of course, the implementation of those changes as well. These can help discover new ways of thinking and perhaps even understand best practice. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. And, I think being able to immerse yourselves in those environments can really give you some great insight. So we've had a bit of a peek at the change. Let's move on to how opportunities, what opportunities present and capitalise on those opportunities. What can you actually take control of and leverage to maximise benefits? And what else do you need to consider? And you'll see I've put the as is to be there. It's it's a common phrase I like to use because it's really about today and then it's also about tomorrow. Before I want to really emphasise this, as I said before, the point around the opportunities around how you do your work. So, and that's sort of the emphasis I'd like to put on it. And hopefully, as we walk through this in the next few minutes, that you'll understand why I say that. But I want to share a significant learning I had, which I've taken into everything that I do now in many, many ways when we talk about process and we talk about change. When it was, I call it the day the penny dropped. But I mentioned before that I'd had a large operational leadership role, and I was leading a national operations team. It was a very senior role. 12,000 settlements went through our business every month. So you could probably, you're probably gathering it was a major bank. So I'll say that out loud. But the first week I started this new job, I walked in and greeted the boss and he said, "Cheryl." I said, yeah, great. I'm really looking forward to starting this week. And he said, "Good." He said, "Look, I don't want you doing anything else but sitting in the process this week." And I looked at him and I said, what? He said, yeah, I want you to sit in the process. I want you to learn and sit in the process and tell me what you see. Okay, and I've got to say, I thought that was rather strange. But because I knew the settlement process end to end. I didn't get this job because I didn't have any experience. I had plenty of experience. But I took it on board, and let's say I sat next to Mary and asked Mary to sort of show me the steps of the process that she was going through. And she did. And I've got to say, when sitting in the process, I was gobsmacked. Mary was explaining this, just rattling it off because it's what she did every day, all the critical steps to getting this to settlement. And it was there was workarounds, it was manual, there was stuff that just had to be known that you wouldn't find anywhere. And I just said to Mary, I said, Mary, how is this the process? This looks really hard. She goes, oh, no, I do it every day. It's fine. It's easy. She said, but yeah, there's lots of bits and pieces to do. Why do we do it that way? She said, because that's the way we do it. That's the way we've been told to do it. Oh, okay. So what if we were able to change something? She goes, oh, yeah. I've already provided suggestions. You know what? I could actually take half the time off these tasks. It'd be very easy. I'd just get rid of that, and that. Wouldn't change anything of any concern of it not being right. And I'd probably take me half the time. And I said, oh, okay, well, why don't we do that? Oh, I've already provided that suggestion. And nothing's changed. I went, right, okay, lesson learned. And I've got to say, I saw that 20 times up and down the process. And I walked away with that thinking, this is opportunity without doing anything else. So my learning experience there, I've taken into working with practitioners. And working with practitioners for almost 9 years now, I've never forgotten that experience. Because now when I talk to practitioners who are very successfully capitalising on change, the best thing, or the thing that I see them do very, very well in making very good decisions, is understanding how they do their work and making the decisions around that on how they want to do their work in light of the industry change or changes that they need to make because they can identify pain points that become very obvious. There's 3 particular areas that they cover that I notice that they cover that help me sort of, I guess, frame up future conversations I have with practitioners who may not be sure about how they want to tackle things. And those 3 areas we've already talked about. It's process, but they're process, risk, and cost. And it always starts with a process because it's how you do your work. But, what are the challenges? What are the opportunities? The impact the industry change will have, the volume of work that we do is going to get more or less, double handling, manual processes, multiple processes. How many times we find ourselves putting the same information in 3 different systems because that's how we have to do the work today. I actually refer that sometimes as fat fingers. We're human. Putting the same information in 3 different places, we will make mistakes because that's just the day-to-day way things can happen. And sometimes that might mean that money doesn't meet its destination unintentionally. And then, of course, that flows through to risk. So what are the risks associated? I know the process. So now does that give me a different perspective on the risks associated with what we do? And how might we minimise that? Or does that raise other concerns? And then, of course, that flows on to cost. Is there value for us to change this? And if we do, where's that business case? If we need to spend money, what do we get back from that? And what's that worth in terms of value for money? Let me, I'll put this into a simple example, and this is where I sort of get my buy through integration. This is one, I'll call it a small example in an end-to-end process, but it's a really nice one to share. Practitioner came to me and said, look, we've just picked up a new client and this is going to mean another 50 matters a day that we need to settle. that's going to increase our work by 50, 60%. And one of the things that obviously we need to work out how we're going to do that volume, but one particular area we started to talk about was the process that they currently had around settlement completion records. So today there was a person's job to go, did the settlement go into the workspace? Did the settlement settle? Yes, it did. Well, now I need to go into that workspace. I need to download a document, settlement completion record. I need to put that into our system. I need to take some data points out of that as well. I need to put that in a spreadsheet, and then I need to give that to our finance team so we can meet all of the, because they're very important steps around reducing risk. There's some financial aspect to it, some reconciliation, etc. And to be honest, this is not an uncommon thing I hear practitioners talk about having to do, and I understand why it is required to be done. But it's very manual, it's double handling, and what this was going to mean, this was already one person's job for half a day, was actually going to be their whole job for the whole day. So I can only imagine the challenge that presents in terms of that being that very manual sort of mundane task being a whole job. And of course, there's still risk associated with that because errors can happen, fat fingers. So when we started to build an integration solution, the business case became very obvious. And what that integration solution meant was, in terms of an outcome, real time will tell you the settlements happened. So a real-time notification in your system, settlements happened. That then will trigger the opportunity, it will then trigger the workflow to automatically download the settlement completion record and the data that sits within that settlement completion record. And this can happen workspace after workspace after workspace. And all of that information is being placed in the system that the practitioner owns. That's their practice management system. Now, we literally removed, the solution was literally going to remove every manual task associated with that, which removed risk because there was reliability in the data, because the data was coming from the source of truth and going where it needed to. But I guess the big question was, this was somebody's job, and that was a concern. But what that then meant was a whole different level of opportunity to use skills of that person who was very, very skilled, remove the mundane tasks and give them other responsibility within the firm that actually meant that they could add additional value. And it was very pleasing for that person, of course, a trusted, streamlined process, but just a way in which it started was looking at the process today and how we feel about that process and what is the impact of the change that's going to be on that process, and then put yourself in the best position to relate the decision to, we sort of talked about the change. There's some of those key things in there that we hear a lot about. It will help bring relativity to the different solutions that will be available that we do hear a lot about that will represent change, but you'll be well informed to decide whether that's the right way for you to go.
Yeah. Actually, I am actually curious. You've got customer experience there, and I'm curious because I know when you do improve processes, often it's great for customer experience as well. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the practitioners can actually improve customer experience also through that process redesign, or if there's other ways that they can improve customer experience as well.
Yeah, look, I could go into a lot of detail about that, but I won't because I'll be taking Graham's time. But the best way for me to describe that is that the streamlining of processes means you create certainty in your process and reliability in your process, which means what you say you're going to do for the customer, you do. So you remove those road bumps that can happen, or at least you can identify those road bumps quickly and put specialised attention to them with the great skills that you have in the people. So get rid of the stuff that's just manual and it becomes reliable, and then you can work on the things that are going to be critical, that might be unique to this particular matter or this particular customer, the customer then sees that you deliver on what you say you're going to do.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Cheryl. And it is so important to actually, deliver that experience, as you say, deliver as you say you will. So I'll now introduce Graham.
Thanks. So welcome everyone. Graham Fairley. So I'm the Chief Information Security Officer here at PEXA. I've been in the role now for probably a bit over 6 months, and here at PEXA, I've been with PEXA for a bit over 5 years now across in the security space, and have been in the technology industry for over 20 years across a lot of infrastructure and cybersecurity roles in quite a variety of businesses, in the property sector, some consulting with from small business all the way through to some of the larger super funds and some large government organisations as well. So bring a sort of a wealth of experience from how to break down technology problems and implement solutions that try and drive some security there. So today, sort of wanted to walk through a couple of things and have it as a bit of a narrative from the cyber threats that we're sort of still seeing that are current front of mind, that we're seeing in the wider industry, linking that in with our risk landscape in terms of the environment that we're operating within, and then some of the areas of opportunity for us to look at to potentially improve and address. And I've sort of structured them so, in terms of ease of implementation through to some of the more complex sort of things. So but collectively, depending on where we are on the journey, there's hopefully some pieces that we can take away there and tie it all together. And then I'll also touch on some of the wider, there's some really good industry information that can help us also drive some improvements, and I'll touch on sort of those as well. What we're sort of seeing 2025 and across the last sort of 12 months, we've been working a lot with security advisory and working with a lot of our vendors and everything that across what we're seeing in the wider industry, and also tying it into the financial sector and those sort of things. For the number one here is, and why I've sort of put it up the top, payment fraud and business email compromise are the two of the really key ones. We sort of are seeing that still, and it's been recorded by the ASD, or the Australian Signal Directorate. Business email compromises is still sort of the number one avenue of attack. So that's where people are sending those phishing emails around, targeting with a hook around trying to drive a sense of urgency and those sort of things to basically make changes or redirect payments or those sort of things. So it's still quite a key, even with all the focus that has been that we've had on over the last few years. This is still sort of the number one item that we see across the wider industry. Even here at PEXA, we see a large amount of attempts to drive that impersonation and those sort of things to try and drive that misdirection or payment scams, those sort of things. Which then sort of leads into identity. Our passwords are still probably one of the weaker parts of how or some of the controls that we can put in. So there's a raft of security measures around this, not just username and passwords, but these days touching on the integrations that Cheryl was referring to around things like APIs and those sort of things. So the security that we utilize there. For those people that are working on those integrations and those sort of things, the API tokens, and when we do sort of integrate, platform to platform across various systems, a good way to think about it, a token that might be issued for an API, those sort of things, is to treat it the same as you would as a password. There's been some observations that people don't sort of link an API token to access a system, the same as they would necessarily treat their password to a system, even though the access that you can get, be it programmatic, is the same as a username and password. So yeah, definitely one of the ones that we're seeing across that. Linking back into the AI part there is, there's starting to be quite a lot of stuff around AI and the use by threat actors of using AI to sort of supercharge, what they're doing, particularly the phishing campaigns. The quality of the phishing campaigns is bumping up, through the use of AI. And then even, bridging into some of the deep fake material and those sort of things, the sophistication and the quality of some of the deep fake stuff is really coming along in leaps and bounds. So definitely we're starting to see a bit of stuff in that sort of space. Then finally touching on a couple of areas around, say, third-party risk. These days, we have a lot of platforms and that on offer that we're able to utilize and consume. So it's how do we trust, a third-party provider? It's just assuming that they're going to, do the right thing or have, good configuration in place is not enough. So, the conversations around those third-party risks of, the platforms that we're consuming and utilizing, how secure are they? Which then finally links into the last one, which is a bit of that low-hanging fruit around how are those platforms that we're utilizing configured, be it, say an email platform like Office 365 or some of the practice management software or those sort of things. How are they actually configured in practice? Misconfiguration is a definite one around, that we're sort of seeing. We've seen that on some of the large platforms like Snowflake this year, which is a large data business that underpins, say, Ticketek and some of those sort of things. The threat the avenue in there is really around the configuration of the platform and how it is. There's some best practice guidance around how they should be configured, and it's an easy one to miss or those sort of things. So it's worth bearing in mind around, as we consume more and more of these platforms, the configuration opportunities around that does represent a vector into or a toehold into the environment. So moving along into then the risk landscape that we are operating within around, depending on the size of the business and those sort of things, having dedicated security teams probably isn't a luxury for a lot of us. I know a lot of my, personal friends and colleagues that run small businesses, whether they're in the medical or practitioners or those sort of things, they don't have a full-time security team. It's advisory and those sort of things. So how do we stay across, and everything that's going on and keep it safe and secure? There's a growing regulatory scrutiny across the around data privacy and those sort of things, the information that we're having to store and that, how do we operate within those frameworks around ticking and making sure that we're doing everything to the best of our ability. And that's garnering more scrutiny from that regulator perspective, and also the cyber insurance perspective is also really pulling that into focus. There is now what we're observing is the ransomware and some of the threat actors as a service type thing. So we are definitely seeing out there as a service type things where they'll have the capability similar to what we have here, in terms of how we would use someone like a AWS or a Microsoft, that as a service, if you want to run a campaign, a targeted campaign, you can via the dark web engage these people, and they literally do it as a fee for service type operation. So it's effectively lowering the bar of entry to focus in on that sort of things, particularly against our high value targets here in Australia in the financial and those sort of things. There's a definite focus around there. And we're seeing that in terms of some of the emerging threat groups across across the world, in terms of their definitely focusing in on Australia because of, we're quite wealthy and affluent. We have a lot of, access to resources, and they're definitely focusing in on that. There's a lot of opportunity here for us, sort of to work that across there. So these threat groups they're primarily, they're run like organizations, and they're structured to get money coming into their businesses as a service, and are structured that way. They're not just all sitting in dark rooms, doing it for the fun. They're they're incentivized and that around doing taking these opportunities and trying to drive that through and treat it like a business. So what can we do about all this in the current landscape around how can we approach that sort of thing? So we're largely bringing it back to, in terms of, simple to more complex and those sort of things, and it ties in with a lot of the guidance. Cyber.gov.au has got a really good collection of resources around for small business around how they can sort of break these things down, leading through to some of the more complex sort of things like the Australian Signal Directorate has a full strategy on how to, their 8 key points for an organisation to cover on sort of things. But to break that down, we've touched on identity and access. There is still around implementing MFA. Now, there are varying levels of what we would call strength around MFA these days. So a big one that we're picking up and starting to get a lot of traction on is what's called phishing resistant MFA. It's not just enough these days to use things like SMS-based MFA because it's easy to intercept. It's moving towards things like using applications like if you've used Microsoft or those sort of things where it's sending a push notification through an application that you've registered with the provider. It's a stronger version of MFA. So there's actually now levels of MFA that are worth looking at. So starting to look at how you can strengthen MFA and those sort of things. Within, we touched a little bit on APIs and access. There's configurations around, do we, effectively whitelist or trust, say at a geographical level, access to some of our systems? Like, is there a good reason for having someone who's overseas being able to access, a service that you're using as a platform? Do you need to be able to sign into your email day to day from another country, particularly say like somewhere like Russia or that? So putting some of those controls in place, like where you can access from, is a really good strategy for trying to reduce the opportunity there. And similarly, within API security, putting some of those geographic restrictions on those sort of things. Payment fraud, obviously in the light of the business email compromise and all those sort of things around how we think about putting those financial payment services or putting those financial details in and sharing those, particularly for us on the exchange, is how do we input those transaction details into the exchange workspace and those sort of things. Is is an important one. Trying to use things like our secure, mechanisms around, inputting that into the system, be it via a PMS system or via PEXA key or another secure way of getting that into the system is a really, really important one. Cyber awareness training, we can't sort of minimize, the general sort of training and constant refreshes around that sort of things for staying on top of those sort of things. How good are we at spotting, particularly with the improvements in the AI-based phishing, being able to detect those phishing attempts and those sort of things. So focusing in on a bit of an awareness, a solid awareness program here and the different ways to detect that is a really important one. And there's also some uplift in terms of some of the the platforms and capabilities that are offered out there in the market around being able to detect those business email compromises. Happy to share some of those with that. Securing the third-party integrations. So where there are like platform-to-platform integrations, if you're utilizing some of the workflow automation and those sort of things, is making sure that they're done securely and there's not an opportunity there. This one largely links back into that access and API security one, but thinking about when we're engaging with our third parties and those sort of things is how are they secured and both commercially and contractually, like what are the levers that we've got around that is a really good one. And then last of all, having a bit of a plan for like if something does happen, what do you do in that scenario? Have a plan of attack, like a playbook to say, okay, here's the people I need to contact. Do you have the phone number for a service provider, or do I need to notify customers or other people? Have that readily available so that you can utilize that in that, so that you're not sort of trying to do that, because when we're in an incident, from experience, when we're doing those investigations, trying to ease that burden definitely helps and makes life a lot easier. It sort of takes the pressure off of trying to find phone numbers or contacts and those sort of things. Who do I reach out to for help? Having that sort of pulled together on a simple list is definitely a really solid one. So how do we look at this, I guess, at a bit of at an industry level is, I guess, working through these sort of things, working in with, as I mentioned before, the cyber.gov and some of those industry initiatives around talking about, information sharing and those sort of things. Like how do we get across and be aware of what's going on in there is probably the first step to working on that. Investing in that cloud and data security around, how do we do backups and secure it? How do we deal with those sort of things? Whether it's within platforms that you're directly configuring or using third parties and those sort of things, which can then lead into, we're starting to get into a few more of the, a bit more complex areas here, but security reviews, can we work with, pen testers or, just to test some of our, controls around that we've got of those key areas or repositories of information, and test how good are our controls, get a bit of an independent review around that sort of things. Obviously, then on the flip side with the AI sort of stuff is how can we utilize that where there's definitely a large growth around on our side, in the security space around AI based. It's really good at doing pattern recognition and detection and those sort of things. So how can we integrate that into platforms that we utilize? So we're starting to see a lot of the platforms, integrating, what we see as co-pilots, or, doing that heavy lifting and sending alerts and those sort of things. And then finally, staying across the, the regulatory and compliance sort of landscape, what's going on? What are our, what do we have to be doing and reporting on, around things like privacy and data sort of stuff. So staying across some of those regulatory requirements and those sort of things there.
Thank you so much, Graham. So now, if you do have any questions, we have a couple of questions come in from other ways. But if you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. A question for you, Graham, that's come in is, are practitioners kind of almost being targeted, do you think, by the cyber, by the cyber scammers and the cyber criminals at the moment? Because we do hear some, you almost think they're way out stories, but
Yeah.
of the emails coming in or emails getting changed on the way through and people putting money into a scammer's account and that sort of thing. Do you think practitioners are actually being targeted?
I think largely, there is a focus on the financial services industry in Australia. So whether it's practitioners, working in the prop tech space or other various, whether it's investment or advisory sort of stuff, there's definitely a focus in there. So that's the reason for talking about things like business email compromise and all that, because some of those practices do lend themselves, because why would, if we talk about, what's the ease of, from a threat actor's perspective, where would would you invest the effort in trying to hack a platform or that sort of thing versus trying to do a bit of a social engineering or something that, because remember, there's a lot of automation going on here. Like using the tools available these days, they can send out like 100,000 emails across a large cohort of people. And they only need one or two to be effective across that large audience. And they're using tools and AI enablement now to effectively scoop up and index things like Google and some of that industry research to basically build up a bit of a library of what's going on in the market and who are the the conveyancers and all that sort of things. It's very easy to sort of pull that together around and sort of have a bit of a target there around it. So it's how do we sort of secure that is, so that's sort of a bit of the background of what's going on across the industry. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you kind of had your top three things that practitioners really should be doing, I mean, clearly up there is having that software on their computer.
Yep.
And as both you and Cheryl were talking about, making sure your processes
Yeah. Yep.
are really robust. Is there also something around making sure that everyone in your team, including yourself, is not downloading software that is not needed for the
Yeah.
actual, being careful there? Is there anything else that you would say for practitioners to kind of go, just tick these boxes and,
Yeah, I think, and it sort of
on the
talks back
way?
to Cheryl's point around the process sort of stuff. Like, have a look at the process and where are the opportunities in the process? Like, how do we improve the process? That's one. Like, what can we just change the model a little bit around, how we actually do that so that we don't actually need are not so reliant on some of that, like whether it's email, because largely I think of email as it's not a secure method of interaction. It's like talking to someone out on the street. Largely anyone could be eavesdropping or that sort of thing. So I think so basically being able to make sure that your email system can't be accessed is a good one. So things like MFA on, if you're accessing, say, Office 365, having MFA enabled frequently so that you do get that challenge. Like there's a balancing point there, but making sure that if you do inadvertently have a password shared through a phishing email or a click, you've still got something like an MFA to protect you there.
Yeah.
Those sort of things. Yeah.
Would
Software
do you
that you're
think,
downloading. Yeah.
yeah. Do you think with multi-factor authentication, do you think with MFA, do you think it's better to have the, if you like, the second authentication through to a mobile or
Yeah. Yep.
or
I would recommend
is it better to
on
use an app?
I would
Yeah.
always recommend an app, like the strength
Yeah.
there. So, phishing resistant MFA is a term that is becoming a lot more prevalent. So, and the way the app does it is, rather than, like, if anyone's been through the process here, it, you know, an SMS is just effectively, it gets sent to a number, so that can be intercepted along the way. So whereas with an app, you're actually registering with the application. So in our case, you're registering with our platform there. So we actually know the device, and there's some checks and balances in there. So it's effectively it's a more secure way of pushing, and it's then verifying that it's come from the right device there, because through that method. So yes, definitely I would advocate an app-based approach to MFA. So Microsoft has their Microsoft Authenticator, which has also you can do things like actually having the number check. So it'll push to say, do you verify? But it also can prompt to say, enter the number that's on the screen. So that's another check that's then going on to just verify that it's come from the right person. So it's really strengthening that process there.
Brilliant. I've actually got a question in terms of, you've kind of outlined all of the risks and you've talked about what can be done. How can what can you do to the practitioners that are out there to actually say you need to take this really, really seriously? How can we make sure that practitioners are actually taking cybersecurity really seriously, given what we said about them actually getting targeted?
Yeah, like I think a lot of these type of sessions around the advocacy and that sort of thing is a big one. And I guess probably with Cheryl, some of the stuff is around how we can drive some of those sort of things. We're a little bit limited in terms of what we can say actually mandate on those sort of things around, you must have this and that. So a lot of it is, based on the advocacy and those sort of things. I think probably from mine, there's probably and I'd be interested to, get a bit of feedback on there, is around, the cyber insurance angle and those sort of things, or on the indemnity insurance for operating as a conveyancer, or those sort of things around. Is there, because that'd also help, with your, insurance policies and those sort of things, drive down costs if you can prove your maturity level is at a higher bar, is another way that, at an industry level, I'd see it sort of going as well.
Yeah, fabulous. And Cheryl, I mean, conveyancing is very much a people business. You're working with people. It's people doing all, it's very much about relationships and that sort of thing. What opportunities do you see? Once you were talking about, once people start, improving their processes, rather than worrying about, therefore, someone having less to do, what can that person then start doing, if you like, to start thinking about building those relationships with clients and, making sure that they get referred and that sort of thing to build the business even further?
Yeah, I guess what I tend to see is when you have confidence in your product, if you like, the value of how you can explain that value becomes so much easier. So it's that stability and confidence and certainty. And look, I wouldn't suggest that everybody has to sort of have data points as well, but certainly I see where the sort of larger operational type, practitioners and businesses, is the importance of being able to demonstrate that too. Here's what we do and we do it well, and here's a proof point to that as well. So, being in the right networks and understanding the environment that you're working in, your geographical environment. What else do you want to find out about where you are and the opportunities that might and you can link this to government changes and look, the housing at the moment is a big topic of conversation. But where can I go to get some intel on that around what might be happening within 10 kilometres of where we're located that may give us the opportunity to be engaging with in different business conversations, or at least just asking a few more questions. As we get bogged down in the do, because it's a very, very busy job and there's a lot of things that are going on, and that will always happen. But how do we bring that certainty that just helps us sort of put our head above the clouds a little bit at times, and just be looking towards the future and looking for where. And look, business growth may not necessarily be something that everybody wants to do, but sustainability is important too. So how do I keep this level of clientele based on the market changing as well? So that would sort of be a broader way of answering that. But it's giving time to look forward versus being bogged down in the today.
And I think that's a fabulous place to finish the webinar this afternoon. Thank you so much again, Cheryl Dixon and Graham Fairley. And thank you everyone for coming along this afternoon. Thank you.